In a small, tranquil village, where time seemed to slow down, where neighbors exchanged friendly greetings and life appeared simple, a terrifying mystery was about to unfold, one that would leave the entire community in a state of disbelief. What could drive someone to bury two bodies 2 meters deep in a duck pen? How does a life that seems picture-perfect unravel so violently, leaving nothing behind but an eerie silence? What secrets could possibly be so dangerous, so horrifying, that they would lead to murder and deception in a place where nothing bad had ever been imagined? For the people in this village, the idea of violence was foreign, something that happened only in distant places. But that illusion was shattered one fateful day, when two people, seemingly in love, with a future bright with promise, vanished without a trace. Their absence wasn't just unusual, it was profoundly unsettling. There was no warning, no cry for help. One day they were simply gone, and as the days passed without a sign of them, the community grew anxious. Friends, family, and neighbors searched for answers, but the questions only grew darker. What happened to them? How could two individuals just disappear into thin air? And why was the search for answers leading investigators to something as innocuous as a duck pen? The investigation at first seemed like an ordinary missing person case, but soon investigators uncovered something far more chilling. A discovery in that quiet, unassuming duck pen would send shockwaves through the village and eventually around the world. It was there, buried deep beneath the surface, that the horrifying truth would begin to surface. What could be so brutal, so shocking, that it would lead to a crime so unspeakable? How could such a thing happen to two people who seemed to have everything? The questions piled up, but the answers were elusive, buried in a web of lies and betrayal. As the investigation unfolded, the reality of the crime started to take shape. Was this a story of jealousy, of greed, or was there something far more sinister at play? As detectives dug deeper into the couple's past, they uncovered a world of hidden tensions, unresolved conflicts, and a dangerous undercurrent of resentment. What had started as a seemingly perfect life had transformed into a dark tale of betrayal and murder, a story so twisted it seemed almost impossible to believe. But in this village, where life had once moved so peacefully, the truth was beginning to emerge, slowly but surely. And as the pieces fell into place, it became clear that this was not just a random act of violence. There was a motive, a plan, and a depth of malice that no one had anticipated. A betrayal so deep, it shook the very foundation of what the villagers believed to be true about those they had trusted. So, this is a story of two lives lost, of a love turned cold, and of a brutal crime that would leave an indelible mark on a quiet community. A story that will make you question the lengths to which people will go for money, for revenge, and for secrets that are too dangerous to be known. Stay with us as we unravel the dark and twisted tale of betrayal, greed, and murder, one that would ultimately leave everyone asking the same haunting question: how well do we really know the people closest to us? Prepare yourself for a journey into the heart of darkness, where the truth is buried deep, and the consequences of greed and deception are more horrifying than you could ever imagine. Alan Hogg had carved out a life most could only dream of. A self-made millionaire from Scotland, he had worked tirelessly to create a successful business empire that gave him the freedom to follow his heart. That heart led him to Thailand, a country he adored for its warm climate, vibrant culture, and welcoming people. It was during one of these visits that he met Not Sudan, a woman who seemed to embody the spirit of the country he loved so much. Not was charismatic, full of life, and the two quickly became inseparable. Together, Alan and Not built a sprawling mansion in Phrae province, a tranquil area far removed from the bustling cities. Their home was a masterpiece, modern yet seamlessly integrated into the lush green surroundings. It was a place that seemed to promise not only luxury, but also serenity. The couple hosted gatherings, immersed themselves in the local culture, and quickly became pillars of their community. To everyone who knew them, their life seemed nothing short of perfect. But perfection often hides its flaws. Beneath the surface of their seemingly harmonious life, tensions were simmering. Money, the very thing that had allowed Alan and Not to live so grandly, had also become a source of strain. Disputes within the family over finances began to bubble up, subtle at first, but impossible to ignore. Rumors swirled in whispers among neighbors and acquaintances, hints of arguments and fractured relationships that stood in stark contrast to the polished image the couple portrayed. In September 2018, the cracks in their facade became impossible to ignore. Alan and Not had made plans to meet with close friends and family, an ordinary gathering that should have gone off without a hitch. But the couple never arrived. At first, their absence seemed odd, but perhaps explainable. Maybe they had been delayed or had simply forgotten. But as hours turned to days with no word, concern gave way to panic. Calls went unanswered. Messages were left unread. The grand mansion, once filled with laughter and light, now stood eerily silent. Friends began to gather, each sharing the same sinking feeling that something was terribly wrong. Alan and Not weren't the type to simply disappear. So, where were they? As worry mounted, questions began to surface. Questions that no one could answer. On the morning of September 19th, the weight of worry became unbearable for a close friend of Alan and Not Hogg. With unanswered calls and mounting unease, they decided to visit the Hogg's grand estate. What awaited them wasn't the warm hospitality they were accustomed to, but an unsettling, almost eerie atmosphere that made the hair on the back of their necks stand up. As the friend approached the sprawling property, the first thing they noticed was the front gate, slightly ajar, swaying faintly in the breeze. The Hoggs weren't careless people. Alan, meticulous by nature, always ensured everything was secure. A gate left open was not just unusual, it was ominous. Still, the friend stepped inside, calling out their names. The silence was deafening. The usual hum of life that characterized the estate, the faint laughter, footsteps on the gravel path, or music drifting from the open windows, was absent. Instead, there was an unnatural stillness, as though the house itself was holding its breath. Crossing the threshold into the house, the unease deepened. The interior, always impeccably maintained, seemed ever so slightly disheveled. Chairs were not aligned as they usually were. A picture frame on the wall hung crooked, and in the kitchen, shards of broken glass glittered faintly on the tile floor. At first glance, it didn't appear ransacked, but the small inconsistencies were enough to send chills through the friend. And then, there it was. A dark stain dried and crusted into the polished floor of the main hall. Blood. It wasn't a large pool, but the sight of it felt like a punch to the stomach. Panic began to set in as the friend frantically searched the house, calling out for Alan and Not. Room after room yielded nothing but eerie silence. Their belongings, phones, wallets, keys, were still there, as though the couple had just stepped out momentarily. But Alan's silver Ford Ranger, a truck he valued as much as his own life, was gone. Outside, the mystery only deepened. The lush grounds surrounding the mansion were as serene as ever, with no signs of disturbance. But when the friend spoke to neighbors, the pieces of a troubling puzzle began to emerge. One neighbor mentioned hearing muffled shouting the night before. It wasn't clear what was being said, but the tone was unmistakable. Anger, desperation, something heated. Another neighbor recalled the unmistakable roar of a vehicle speeding away late into the night, shattering the usual tranquility of the area. The friend wasted no time in contacting the authorities. When the police arrived, they treated the scene with the gravity it deserved. Officers began meticulously examining the property, taking note of every detail, no matter how small. The bloodstain in the main hall was sampled and photographed. Every room was scrutinized, every drawer opened. Yet there were no clear signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no forced entry. It was as if Alan and Not had simply vanished into thin air. Investigators turned their attention to the missing truck. If Alan had taken it himself, why would he leave behind his wallet, keys, and phone? If someone else had taken it, what were they trying to hide or escape from? These questions loomed large, but the answers remained frustratingly elusive. The local community was abuzz with speculation. In a close-knit town like Frey, news of the disappearance spread like wildfire. People whispered about the bloodstain, the missing truck, and the argument overheard by neighbors. Some theorized that the couple had fallen victim to a random act of violence. Others suspected a far more calculated crime, rooted in personal vendettas or financial disputes. The mansion, once a symbol of success and happiness, now stood as a chilling reminder of how quickly life could spiral into darkness. Friends, neighbors, and investigators alike couldn't shake the sense that something deeply sinister had unfolded within those walls. As police dug deeper, combing through the couple's lives, relationships, and past interactions, they began to uncover a web of tension and discord that had been carefully hidden beneath the surface. Alan and Nott's disappearance was no accident. It was the result of a chain of events so dark and calculated that even those closest to the couple couldn't have imagined it. The seeds of suspicion had been planted, and the search for the truth was just beginning. The search for Alan and Nott had turned from a missing persons case into a chilling investigation that gripped the town. As police intensified their efforts, it became clear that someone had gone to great lengths to cover their tracks. The mansion's polished exterior now held the kind of secrets that didn't just whisper, but screamed of betrayal and violence. Officers returned to the property day after day, meticulously searching every corner. The surrounding grounds, once admired for their manicured beauty, were now scrutinized with the sharp eye of suspicion. Then an officer's attention was drawn to something seemingly insignificant: the duck pen at the rear of the estate. It was an ordinary structure, blending seamlessly into the serene backdrop of the property. Yet, as the officers approached, an unsettling detail caught their eye. The soil within the pen appeared freshly turned. It was an anomaly in a place where every detail was carefully maintained. The area was cordoned off, and under the cover of growing unease, investigators began to dig. The first few shovelfuls of soil revealed nothing but damp earth. But as they dug deeper, the air grew heavier, almost stifling, as if the ground itself was reluctant to give up its secret. Just 2 meters down, they uncovered a sight that sent a collective shudder through the team. A shallow grave, containing 2 bodies, the remains were confirmed to be Alan and Nott. The discovery was as grim as it was puzzling. Alan, ever the composed and dignified figure in life, had been executed with a single gunshot to the head. Nott, who was known for her lively and spirited demeanor, had met a far more brutal end, her skull shattered by repeated blows from a hammer. The sheer violence of the act painted a picture of deep-seated rage or desperation. The scene was horrific, but it raised more questions than it answered. Why the duck pen? Why bury them on the property at all, rather than disposing of the bodies elsewhere? These choices seemed hasty, reckless even, as if the perpetrator had acted in panic, or had wanted to send a message. As investigators processed the site, the quiet town of Frey was rocked by the grim news. The community, once drawn to Alan and Nott's charm and apparent success, now found themselves gripped by fear and speculation. Whispers grew louder with each passing hour. Who could have committed such a calculated and vicious crime? Was it someone they knew? A friend, a family member, a trusted confidant? Or was it an outsider, someone envious of their wealth and stature? The possibilities felt endless, each one more unsettling than the last. As forensic teams began their meticulous examination of the scene, police turned their focus toward the couple's inner circle. It was no secret that Alan's relationship with Nott's extended family had been fraught with tension. Disputes over money, property, and perceived slights had created a rift that many suspected ran deeper than anyone had realized. Neighbors described heated arguments on the property in the weeks leading up to the disappearance, though no one could have imagined they would escalate to something so unthinkable. The missing Ford Ranger became a critical piece of the puzzle. Officers issued an alert, spreading the word across nearby provinces in the hope that the vehicle might lead them to a suspect. Meanwhile, interviews with friends and family unearthed troubling details about the couple's final weeks. Alan had reportedly confided in a close friend about feeling uneasy, mentioning that he believed someone had been watching the house. He had even considered increasing security, but dismissed it as paranoia. Nott too had expressed concern. She had grown distant, withdrawing from her usual social circles. When pressed, she revealed that she was dealing with family problems, but refused to elaborate further. To those who knew her, this uncharacteristic reticence spoke volumes. It was clear that something was brewing, something dark and dangerous. As the investigation continued, the discovery of the bodies felt less like an answer and more like the opening of a floodgate. The town braced itself as the search for the truth plunged deeper into a web of greed, betrayal, and violence that would expose more than anyone was prepared to face. The true depth of the conspiracy surrounding Allen and Nott's deaths was about to come to light, and the secrets buried alongside them were darker than anyone could have imagined. The discovery of Allen and Nott's bodies shifted the investigation into overdrive. The town, already engulfed in shock, became a hub of rumors and whispered theories. The police, however, were focused. Forensic evidence from the scene hinted at more than a single perpetrator. There were multiple sets of footprints near the shallow grave, and traces of tire tracks leading away from the property, clues that suggested a coordinated effort. Investigators began untangling the couple's recent history, focusing on their financial dealings and relationships. At the center of the storm stood Nott's brother, Warut Sachakit. His name had come up repeatedly in interviews, often paired with words like trouble and resentment. It wasn't just the inheritance disputes or the rumors of heated arguments. There was something inherently sinister about the way Warut had distanced himself from the family in the months leading up to the murders. The breakthrough came when police examined surveillance footage from nearby roads. The missing silver Ford Ranger had been caught on camera late on the night of September 18th, heading away from the estate. The driver was difficult to identify, but the passenger seat appeared occupied. Hours later, the same truck was spotted again, this time with only one person inside. With this lead, investigators dug deeper into Warut's activities. Bank records revealed large, suspicious cash withdrawals shortly before the couple's disappearance. The timing aligned perfectly with a damning tip from a reluctant informant. Warut had hired 3 men to handle a problem. The payment, as the informant described, was insultingly small, barely enough to split among the hired men. Greed, it seemed, had not only driven Warut to plot the murders, but had also ensured his plan was sloppy and reckless. The team worked tirelessly to piece together the timeline. Allen and Nott had returned home earlier than expected on the night of their deaths, interrupting the hired killers before they were fully prepared. Evidence suggested that Allen had confronted the intruders in the hallway, where he was shot without hesitation. Nott, hearing the commotion, had attempted to flee but was cornered in the living room, where she met her gruesome end. Warut's role in the crime became clearer with each passing day. Witnesses came forward, describing his growing hostility toward Allen and Nott. Warut had long felt overshadowed by his sister's success, and the couple's apparent wealth only deepened his resentment. He saw himself as the rightful heir to their fortune, convinced that their prosperity had come at his expense. The betrayal was unfathomable. How could a brother orchestrate such a heinous act against his own sister? And why had Warut chosen to leave the bodies on the property, a decision that all but guaranteed their eventual discovery? These questions haunted the investigators as they closed in on Warut, who had gone into hiding after the news of the bodies broke. The police traced the Ford Ranger to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Inside, they found a chilling collection of evidence: tools used to dig the shallow grave, a hammer with traces of blood, and clothing stained with dirt and sweat. But Warut was nowhere to be found. As the noose tightened, the 3 hired men began to crack under pressure. One of them confessed, revealing the details of Warut's plan and his role in orchestrating the murders. The confession was enough to secure arrest warrants, but it also painted a picture of a man driven not just by greed, but by a deep, festering hatred. Warut's flight only added to the tension. Was he still in the area, planning his next move? Or had he escaped entirely, leaving the town to grapple with the aftermath of his actions? As investigators worked around the clock to track him down, the town of Frey was left with more questions than answers. The darkness surrounding Allen and Nott's deaths had begun to lift, but the full truth was still just out of reach, lurking in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. As the investigation intensified, the weight of the town's grief hung heavily in the air. Frey was no stranger to hardship, but never before had it experienced such a shocking betrayal within its own community. The pressure on law enforcement to find Warut grew with each passing hour. Friends and family of Allen and Nott watched helplessly, hoping for justice but fearing the worst. Then came the breakthrough. An informant, driven by a sense of justice, or perhaps the lure of the reward, came forward with a tip. Warut had been hiding out at a remote farmhouse, far from the prying eyes of the town. Police acted swiftly, organizing a late-night raid. The farmhouse was surrounded, and with no way out, Warut tried to make a run for it. But his attempt was futile. In moments he was tackled to the ground and handcuffed, his days of hiding over. When Warut was finally brought back to Frey, the town gathered in silence, watching as the man who had once been a respected figure now stood in disgrace. His expression, once filled with arrogance, was now one of defeat. But even in custody, Warut showed no remorse. His cold demeanor sent chills down the spines of those who had known him, as they realized the depth of his hatred and greed. The trial began shortly afterward, and quickly became a national spectacle. Media outlets from across the country descended upon the courthouse, eager to report on the shocking betrayal and brutal murders. Every seat in the courtroom was filled as the prosecution laid out their case. The three hired men took the stand, offering chilling accounts of how Warut had planned the murders in meticulous detail. They described a man driven by more than just greed, a man consumed by bitterness, resentment, and a need to dominate those he perceived as having outshone him. Testimonies from Alan and Nott's friends painted a different picture of the victims. Alan was described as a hard-working businessman who had built his success from the ground up, while Nott was remembered as a caring sister who had stood by her brother through thick and thin. Their lives had been cruelly cut short by someone they trusted, someone who shared their blood. Warut's defense team tried to argue that he had acted out of desperation, that he had been financially cornered and irrational in his actions, but the evidence was overwhelming. The judge delivered a scathing rebuke before sentencing Warut and his accomplices to life in prison. For the people of Frey, the verdict brought some measure of justice. But justice could not bring back the lives that had been lost. Alan and Nott's deaths left a void that could never be filled. Their mansion, once a symbol of their success and unity, now stood as a somber monument to the fragility of trust and the dangers of unchecked ambition. Beyond the courtroom, the story of Alan and Nott became a cautionary tale. It spread across the country, prompting conversations about greed, betrayal, and the importance of family bonds. How had things come to this? How had simple sibling rivalry turned into such a deadly hatred? This case is more than just a brutal crime. It's a reflection of the darker side of human nature. It shows us that wealth and success can sometimes invite jealousy, even from those we love. It teaches us that unresolved tensions, when left unchecked, can spiral out of control, with devastating consequences. Most importantly, it reminds us that betrayal rarely comes from strangers. It's often those closest to us, those we trust the most, who can cause the deepest wounds. Alan and Nott's story urges us to cherish the bonds we have with those around us and to confront conflicts before they become insurmountable. If this story made you reflect on the dangers of unchecked greed or left you wondering about the fragility of trust, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever witnessed or experienced an instance where jealousy led to unexpected outcomes? Let's open up the discussion and learn from each other's perspectives. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like this video. Sharing your support helps us bring more gripping true crime stories to you. Finally, if you want to see more stories like this one, hit that subscribe button. Here's a question for you. Do you believe families should support and protect each other no matter what? If you do, subscribe to the channel. Only those who believe betrayal is justified won't subscribe. Thank you for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the next video.